Hey, welcomes, greetings, welcomes, everyone. It is GleeCon, and I am back piping in another episode of Lore of Warcraft. Thank you for tuning in. On our last episode, we almost kind of had a head fake as one that was called the Stockades, but it's going to be part of a 5-part addressing of the Stockade series, where I just traveled. I showed basically how you would take a character that was in the Kalimdor area and get them over to the Stockades if they had never been there before. Presumably that means you're a night elf. And I did off camera do some stuff. I'll kind of recap how that run went on the next episode as we run around and play with the next character of that little 5-part series. So I'm going to kind of save that for when we're running around next time. But on the last episode of reading, we started off kind of a few episode interlude where we look at the World of Warcraft strategy guide. There are 2 strategy guides, and we're just going to kind of continue that. We looked at, it was sort of funny. It explained some of the emotes, and it kind of like, I don't want to, not mansplain, let's call it like gamer-splained some of the most basic speech that everybody uses nowadays in texts, and everyone's a gamer now. My grandma's a gamer, you know, everybody that has a phone. I can't think of almost any human that doesn't at least play like some little game on their phone. So stay a while and listen as we get into this. So we just stopped at the 2nd chapter. I think each one of these toolbar things are going to be icons. We could almost probably identify them. So the first one was sort of the eagle view or whatever, eagle vision. There's a couple. And now actually, as soon as I say that, I'm looking at this. It's like an arcane circle with an N in it. I actually don't recognize that. So I'll keep my eye out for it when we're playing, but I could recognize pretty much all the rest of these. Maybe we'll talk about them as we get to each one, but yeah, stay a while and listen as we look at a glimpse of the world. So this just kind of gives us a basic, we're not going to really read too much. We're just going to glance through for the sake of kind of like an archaeological dig here. What did they think we needed to know back then? So of course they described the Eastern Kingdoms. They described Lordaeron, which would be the top half of that. Maybe this is interesting. Maybe we can read a little bit of this. It says, the Eastern Kingdoms have been through tumultuous times since the days when Lordaeron stood proud and strong. The northern lands are now a place of plague, disruption, undead, and religious zealotry. Wars cover the lands to the south, and the looming threat posed by the Dark Portal prevents complacency from any of the races that live there. The undead of Lordaeron fly the flag of the Horde now, no matter how loose the friendship between the Orcs and the Forsaken. Because of Lordaeron's proximity to the lands of dwarves and humans, the undead are always fighting. Hillsbrad is embroiled in raids and combat on a daily basis. Neither side has been able to gain a heavy foothold in the other's territory, so it's unknown how events will unfold in that region. Little noticed by the humans of Stormwind, Lordaeron faces enemies at home as well. The Forsaken are being attacked by human zealots even within their borders, but the worst fear is that a plague of mindlessness will overcome their senses. This scourge is the driving force behind the undead's allegiance to the Horde. Many of the new poisons and diseases being spread by the Forsaken are done to increase their recruitment of living beings into the ranks of the undead. Living on the footsteps of the Plague Lands, Undercity is an almost constant war with poisoned beasts. Those who stray too far from the protected fields of Tristful Glades shall know the perils of such troubled times, whether they're living or dead already. South of home, in Silverpine Forest, the undead must contend with Dalaran troops and the forces of Aragal, a mystic of great power and anger. All right, so that's actually kind of interesting to read this in a nutshell kind of view of what's going on when you start playing World of Warcraft. Classic. Okay, Cosmodon. In Cosmodon, the dwarves of Ironforge face unrest. Get TikTok templates, guys. And a most uncivil war against the Dark Iron Dwarves. It's unknown how many of the dwarves in Ironforge are loyal to this rebellious faction, but rumors make the problem out to be far worse than the council lets on. In Loch Modan, there are also many skirmishes against the feral Trogs and several clans of ogres. Though the dwarves are quite aggressive about patrolling their territory, many of their finest soldiers are spread too thin to prevent incursions by enemy forces. Word has reached the capital recently that even the outpost at Dun Gaz has been attacked, even to the point where its current status is unknown. The gnomes are faced with exile from Nomergon. Many of their number have been turned mad by exposure to deadly concoctions brewed during their fights against the Trogs. The gnomes currently stay in the outer parts of Dunmorog and in Ironforge itself, working on ideas to reclaim their homeland, to To assist the dwarves, they helped in the creation of a train that runs between Ironforge and Stormwind. All right, I feel like they could have got into that a little bit more, but okay. I hate that they call the southern half of it, they just call it Azeroth. I wish there was a better name for that, but I guess there's not. Farther south, the humans would perhaps be able to rally and aid their various allies if they had not problems of their own. The Defius, a gang of powerful brigands and thieves, has grown to such strength that people wonder why their leader has been so absent on the matter, with new attacks by orc clans in Red Ridge Mountains and a most desperate state of affairs in Duskwood as well. Even lands vital to Stormwind's safety are threatened. So, we're about to wrap that Defius story up. Westfall along the coast has seen more than attacks from the Defius. Gnolls have formed a massive contingent in Westfall, lighting great fires to herald their armory. Hundreds of these creatures now hold the mountains in the southeast and many areas along the coastline. The local militia is horribly outnumbered, but their cries to the capital have gone unanswered. Elwyn Forest, hailed for its safe roads and pleasant farms, is no longer such a gentle place either. Not only are the Defius rampant, but kobolds and murlocs have higher numbers than ever before. Elwyn's mines are silent, and approaching the lakes and ponds of the area begs for trouble. Even the people inside Stormwind have felt the shakings of coming times. So many Defius members were thrown into the stockades of the city in such a short time that conditions became untenable. A riot has succeeded in pushing the guards out of the stockades and is now entirely off limits to the general public. Several guardsmen didn't make it to the surface, and the Defius are holding their ground. All right. That kind of leaves out a lot, like it doesn't talk about Red Ridge, it doesn't talk about Duskwood. Central Kalimdor is where the majority of the Horde's races are raised and trained. Durotar is the seat of the Horde. Orgrimmar is the greatest city of the east, and both orcs and trolls flock there to find safety, trade, and kinship. Trouble in this red, dusty land comes from the many centaur who infest Central Kalimdor. Thrall has made push after push to throw the centaur into exile, but their numbers remain. In addition, a number of cultists live in Durotar, and their numbers are growing. These demon worshippers are of the foulest sort, and the Horde does not tolerate their presence. On the other side of Kalimdor, the Tauren live in moderate peace in Mulgore. Thrall aided the Great Tauren in their battles against the Centaur, and this has firmly pulled the Tauren into the Horde's fold. Though Thousand Needles is mostly lost to the Tauren for now, the city of Thunder Bluff is a site that brings comfort to even an undead Horde traveler. How many humans would dare to attack the high and defended peaks of this isolated haven? Between Mulgore and Durotar are the Barrens, where the small village of Crossroads has been growing. Though centaur, harpies, and many beasts live in this open land, the Horde has done well in keeping the northern Barrens clear of greater threats. Sadly, this cannot be said for the south. Dwarves mine and work openly near Duskwallow Marsh, and the Quillboars there have massive numbers and better equipment than their northern equivalents. Growing efforts by these factions in the south has made travel into southern Kalimdor quite treacherous. And southern Kalimdor, we're not talking about southern Barrens, we're talking about Thousand Needles to Naris. Southern Kalimdor is a dangerous place, save for several outposts of gnomes and goblins. There are few actual towns in this remote corner of Azeroth, and fighting between the Horde and the Alliance is not uncommon. Thousand Needles is desolate, and the Centaur are still entrenched enough to prevent the Tauren from returning to the area. High in the peaks, a town continues to service the Horde members who come through, but Freewind Post is a small place with little more than the geography of the land to protect itself. The salt flats in the eastern edge of Thousand Needles lead down into Tanaris, a desert where drakes and insectoid monsters thrive. Both the Horde and Alliance are able to find shelter in these areas by seeking the gnomes and goblins who create neutral communities in these arid climes. Gadgetzstan is the largest of these towns, and crafters come from far and wide to meet the skilled alchemists and blacksmiths. Feralis is west of Thousand Needles and is a jungle of great beauty. The Horde and Alliance both lay claim here, and the Night Elves have positions at the eastern and western edges of the land, and their main town is on a small island in the northeast. The Horde settled on the mainland toward the center of the jungle. Many ogres, yeti, and unaligned Tauren have clans in Feralis, so the fighting there is rarely limited to the greater struggle between the great factions. Oh, we have northern Kalimdor as well. I guess with central and southern. Northern Kalimdor is, and we also ignored Ungoro Crater and Silithus, by the way. Northern Kalimdor is primarily the territory of the Night Elves. Though pushed from their former homes, the Night Elves retain some power in these regions and are working to heal the damage done by the Burning Legion. Darkshore is on the far northwest of Kalimdor, just across the sea from Teldrassil. The town of Aberdeen is a focal point for crafters and those who protect the wilderness. The Naga that threaten much of the coast have retained some power here, primarily toward the ruins of Blackfathom Deeps. Elsewhere in Darkshore, the trouble is mostly centered around a disease that's gotten into both the Furbolg and the beasts of the forest. Ashenvale is the older home of the Night Elves, where when they were immortal and at the heights of their civilization. Now it is but a seed for their return to greatness. Twisted crazed trees come down from the entrance into Fellwood, while demonic leavings taint some of the waters and land throughout Ashenvale. The Golden Road into the Barrens is a dangerous path, as many Horde members come into Ashenvale from there. Some of these wanderers are looking to explore the forest, others have darker motives. The northeast of Kalimdor is dangerous for all but the strongest of heroes to explore. Ajara, Winterspring, and Fellwood are laced with ancient magics and creatures of overwhelming power. And finally, Teldrassil. Things are somewhat calmer for the Night Elves of Teldrassil than for many members of the Alliance. After fighting against the Burning Legion, the Night Elves sustained such losses that they have moved to Darnassus as their new capital. The city, located on a large island north of Kalimdor, is but a glimmer of the Night Elves' true glory, but it has some measure of peace. Yet the land still suffers, and the Druids of Teldrassil fight every day to stop the taint that runs through so much of Kalimdor's woods. Though loose members of the Alliance, the Night Elves aren't engaged in attack with the Horde. I would disagree with that. Being separated by water, it's somewhat difficult for the Horde to attack Teldrassil, and it's harder for the Horde's members to focus their anger on the Night Elves, who have constantly tried to remain neutral in their dealings. Indeed, it's the humans, dwarves, and gnomes who have interfered so many times in the dealings of Orc control that Night Elves are often seen only as guilty by association, but yet they fight a lot. I guess when the game's first starting, there wasn't PvP, so then that makes a little more sense. It also kind of shows why the Forsaken and the Night Elves are sort of, they almost have their own zones and own experience for questing if you decide to be one of those. All right, I'm not going to read through this history, but we'll glance through it because we've done a lot. Now, some of this is tapped and directly put into Chronicles, or if you look up like the history of Warcraft on like Wowpedia, I think it draws a lot straight from here. I don't know which came first, Wowpedia or this, but before Warcraft, 10,000 years before the Dark Portal, Night Elves awoken, and they start tinkering with magic. The Burning Legion senses this and attacks. This is basically the War of the Ancients. The dragons come and help save them, blowing up the Well of Eternity, breaking the land apart, so the Pangea is sort of broken up, and Night Elves swear off arcane magic. 4,000 years later, some of those Night Elves leave. They end up making their way to the Eastern Kingdoms. They found Quel'Thalas, and they separate and become High Elves, and eventually, as we know them, the Blood Elves. And they also start their battle against trolls. 3,100 years later, the humans arise, the Empire of Arathor in Lordaeron. Actually, I think we read in Chronicles, there's some things that go on before that. Down in the nation of Strom, I want to say is first. Okay, a couple hundred years after that, the High Elves are beginning to lose against the war, against the trolls, so they team up with the humans and beat them back. 100 years after that, humans have got magic as their kind of price for fighting the trolls, but they're reckless with it, and now they are starting to allow demons back in the world, and that's where you get that Order of Tirisfal, which is what leads to the last Guardian, or the Guardians. Then you get 2,400 years, finally, that leads up to the human lands fragmenting into the different nations. In the year 45 years before the Dark Portal, Egwene, who is one of the last Guardians, she defeats Sargeras, but then she's kind of impregnated with his evil spirit. And 5 years after that, the Burning Legion has made its way to Draenor, corrupted the orcs, and they start defeating that whole land. A few years later, Medivh is born. 1 year before the portal opens, Medivh has become possessed by Sargeras, and he works with the orcs, opens up the Dark Portal, and that leads to Warcraft, Orcs, and Humans. So this is a recap of everything we've been reading for the past almost 2 years now. In year 0, Medivh is killed by Lothar and Khadgar. Gul'dan is knocked into a coma. The leader of the Horde is slain at the end of Warcraft 1. Basically, in Warcraft 1, the Horde wins, but it has Orgrim Doomhammer basically becomes the lord, and then they start creating Death Knights, and Lothar binds the humans together to fight back, and that's how you start Warcraft 2, which is 6 years later after the portal. Orgrim fights. He uses his fleets to fight. They end up losing. Lothar is killed, and the orcs begin to be rounded up and put in internment camps. Warcraft 2 expansion. Ner'zhul, who is a key figure on Draenor, he's trying to open that dark portal back up. And he sends people through the, like, what's left of the dark portal to capture these different artifacts. And the Alliance fights against that. And eventually they shut the dark portal for good. But it does strand some of the heroes like Khadgar in Draenor and Twisting Nether or whatever. Then you have Thrall's Tale, which is the prelude to to Warcraft 3, which is called Lord of the Clans, and he's basically raised as a human slave gladiator, breaks his way out, and starts unifying the Horde as the war chief of the Horde, starting with the orcs, but he also gets trolls and Tauren at this point in time. In Warcraft 3, now humans are starting to crumble, and this is where you see Arthas slowly become corrupted and falling to the Scourge, and you see Lordaeron fall. This is where you really start almost getting the first beginnings of the Forsaken race. Then you have the expansion to that, the Frozen Throne. Illidan is finally set free to help fight the Forsaken, because the Forsaken have really killed the High Elves. This is where you start to get the beginning of the Blood Elves. The Horde and Alliance actually have a truce, and they go to fight with the Scourge even, and they go to fight back against the Burning Legion, and they beat them, but then their alliance sort of breaks, and at year 25, we begin the World of Warcraft. Okay, so this is where we talk about the different factions, what the different rep levels do. Really, other than the main racial factions, and you get to, what's interesting here is Booty Bay, Everlook, and Gadgetzan have their own rep, the three goblins, Gadgetzan / I guess Ratchet, so there's 4 of them. But there are the Argent Dawn, so you can work with them, I believe, out in the Plaguelands. You have the Bloodsail Buccaneers, which is something that goes directly against the Ratchet Booty Bay type of reputation. That's where they're a key part to getting insane in the membrane. Gelkis and Magrum clan centaurs, I believe, are sort of mutually exclusive at this point in time. A Cataclysm, once that comes along, I think you can do both. Ravenholt is, I don't know. We haven't read enough about that yet. I don't know. I know that I believe that's a really weird, rare one. I want to say it's up like around Alterac Mountains, but I'm not sure. I could be wrong. I could be conflating that with the Syndicate. The Syndicate's definitely up there by Alterac. As we read about very recently, they are sort of the holdouts from Paranold. We've just now started to kill them, and I guess you could possibly get on their side. I don't know. Ravenholt, we still have yet to do anything with Ravenholt, to read about it, to play with those characters. I'm curious. That's just one of those obscure tiny side factions, and it's interesting to see how that will go. All right, so then they give you a history of some of the cities of Azeroth. And sure, I feel like this book is not going to have a ton of lore. Excuse me. But these historical things, yeah, why not? Let's read some. All right, so many of Azeroth's cities have risen and fallen through the many wars that have plagued the land. There are a few that still stand even after the ravages of the Burning Legion and the Scourge have torn through. There's Darnassus. High atop the boughs of the great tree Teldrassil lies the wondrous city of Darnassus, the new refuge of the reclusive Night Elves. Druids, hunters, and warriors alike make their homes among the rows of wood-crafted lodges and delicately tended groves. The Temple of the Moon rises like a shining beacon above the trees, flanked by the colonnaded Hall of Justice, where the vigilant sentinels gather to safeguard the land. Ruled by the High Priestess Tyrande Whisperwind, Darnassus stands as a tranquil testament to all that the Night Elves hold sacred. The city in tune with the rush and flow of nature, Darnassus was built along the shores of a large lake, with elegant bridges spanning its crystalline waters. Elsewhere, the falling leaves of the forest carpet the soft pathways of the city. At first glance, Darnassus seems a tranquil refuge for the Night Elves and fitting replacement for their lost home in Ashenvale. However, now Darnassus was created without nature's blessing, and the creatures around their city suffer greatly for it. The great tree was planted for the most selfish of reasons, to regain their lost immortality by creating a tree that would bind their souls to the eternal world. Opulent is the first word that may spring to mind when gazing around this grand city. It's a city alive and breathing with brightly colored foliage and softly glowing lights. Wisps float serenely along the pathways, and large ancient protectors cast their gaze about them, looking for any sign of danger. The Tradesman's Terrace in the southwestern section of the city. Buildings of pagoda-inspired architecture line the pathways with their signs prominently announcing the weapons and armor they're selling. On the west end of the city, the Temple of the Moon sits with a large welcoming walkway leading into the moonlit and mystical alcove within. A large alabaster statue stands proudly in the center of a pool of water. Trainers surround the lower, rising around the pool and the lower ring, and at the top of the ramp, Lady Toronto Whisperwind herself stands. To the east of the temple and in the center of the city, surrounded by the water, stands a large tree in the shape of a bear. Inside lies no heart, but the treasures of its citizens are kept here in the bank. Just slightly to the northwest of the bank sits the rune-surrounded portal to Ruthurin village on the sea. In the northern region of the city, smaller protectors make their rounds. Their woody creaking blends in with the sounds of smaller creatures as they make their patrols to the Cenarian Enclave. The eastern portion of the city contains the Craftsman's Terrace. Herein lie the various craftsmen sell their wares and train the next to carry on their traditions. It's a visually beautiful city and one worth making the trip to if you don't happen to be on the wrong side of the war. Okay, so they lied. That is not at all the history of the city. It's just a physical description of the city. Okay. It makes me almost want to dismiss some of these out of hand. But let's just take a glance at Ironforge and see if we actually get any history. While many dwarven strongholds fell during the Second War, the mighty city of Ironforge, nestled in the wintry peaks of Dún Morog, was never breached by the invading horde. A testament to the dwarves' expertise of shaping rock and stone, Ironforge was constructed in the heart of the mountain itself, an expansive underground city of craftsmen, explorers, miners, and warriors. Although the alliance has been weakened by recent events, the dwarves of Ironforge, led by King Magni Bronzebeard, are forging a new future in the world. The first dwarves came up from the depths of the earth and founded the Cosmodon after the Titan shaper Cosgaroth. Constructing an altar for their Titan father, the dwarves crafted a mighty forge within the heart of the mountain. Thus, the city that grew around the forge would be called Ironforge ever after. With the loss of their beloved Gnomeregan to invaders, what was left of the gnomish people took residence within the safe halls of their friends and neighbors. The entrance to Ironforge can be imposing to any newcomer. Its large stony facade and heavy metal portcullis look ready to shut out even the most powerful of the Titans. Within the city, the sounds of hammers falling rings out through the hustle and bustle. Large openings run through the center of the pathways. Gazing beneath your feet may reveal the source of the heat. Gated catwalks sit above the hot molten metal, guarding any from a clumsy and costly mistake of falling in. Following the outer ring of the great city leads past the military quarter. Okay, and then they just kind of talk about describing the different quarters. Then you get the library. Yeah, so this is more of a description of the city itself. It's you do have the Forlorn Caverns with fishing, but even that, it's not giving us where do these Forlorn Caverns come from. It's not really history. It's mostly description. Okay, so you have Stormwind, last of the great human cities. They talk about the entrance with the legacy of heroes, the statues, the Valley of Heroes, and then they kind of give you the different districts that you would go through. And you have the Boy King Anduin Rin, because his dad is missing in action, and he's sort of just filling in. We'll get to visit him soon in one of our episodes in Warcraft Classic, but we still have a lot to do to kind of explore what's going on there. And then they go on to explain Orgrimmar, founded by Orgrim Doomhammer in Durotar, named after people that were close to him. They just sort of, they talk about Thunder Bluff, just a series of mesas. They established it as a center for their trade caravans, and then that's really it. They just kind of talk about the layout of the city as we know it and as we've been playing, and then you have the Undercity, which is beneath the ruined capital of Lordaeron. The royal crypts have been turned into the city. I would say like crypts/sewers, and then they just kind of talk about the layout. Yeah, so it's less history and more layout. All right, now they break down the races. I think this is kind of interesting because you get these starting stats. I don't know that this under the hood stat stuff is the same, but I remember this is really bringing back memories for me, because I believe I had this strategy back in the day, or I had a mini version of it. I think I like at some point I had like the World of Warcraft collector's edition or something like that, and it came with like a little strategy guide, but it might have been this, but like small. But I can remember really looking at these stats like they mattered. Like I was going to really have to meta min-max this stuff. But they show you like of the 5 classes, what stats do you start with between strength, agility, stamina, intellect, and spirit. I don't see anything starting above a 25. They're never going to start with a high intellect because they don't have an intellect pass. But they do show their starting. They're better at guns, cold resistance. They have treasure finding. They have that stone form. Let's look at the roleplay tips, because they felt like you need that. It does give you a little bit of a history. For instance, it tells you how they were once called Earthen. But I like let's see what the role-playing tip is. Playing a dwarf can be a fun undertaking. They are generally fearless, stout fighters, and are usually up for some good ale after a long, hard day. The dwarves in Azeroth have another mission as well, in finding the archaeology that will unlock the answers to their past. Be creative with their personality. While it's easy to have them be a ale-swilling, gun-toting braggart, they can't all be. Perhaps your dwarf finds the thrill of exploring an archaeology to be right up their alley. Okay, and I like how you get the sort of factions within each crest. Night Elf, you've seen that in the past in human, but dwarf and gnome are sort of new. I guess orc, troll, tauren. Yeah, the Forsaken. I feel like some of these I've seen. Some of them you don't see that often. Those crests. Gnome, and they give you the 4 classes that you can be. They give you their racial traits. They're good at engineering, arcane resistance, intellect. Roleplay tips. They give you they because of that bonus to intellect, they get a 20. Oh, they get 26s in a couple of their things. So they're just really breaking that down. They give you the humans. The humans can be 6 different classes. They give you the racial traits. They don't give you role-playing tips for a human, because I guess basically you just be whatever you want. The Night Elves, they give you some of their thing, their 5 classes. Yeah, they're just... Oh, this is a spillover from the other page. They do give you role-play tips for a human. They're the most versatile, takes all kinds. Easier races to play. They can be anything to anyone. You can't even speak to them. Oh, it says basically they're just saying they're not really down with the Horde, so roleplay that aspect. But even that, I feel like who cares? Then you get the orcs and some roleplay tips. You get the tauren, and these pictures are cool. This is totally like the nerd fuel that I would have just been gobbling up when I was younger. There you go. You got trolls. You got undead. Okay, so we're still on this second chapter, and then they get into the classes. So they give you a rundown of the different classes. What is a druid, hunter, mage, paladin, a priest, a rogue, a warlock, warrior, shaman. So let's just kind of read one. Let's read shaman and just see how this description would be, because I don't think it's not really lore heavy. The shaman are the spiritual leaders of their clans and tribes, guiding the peoples of the Horde to their destinies. Gifted with great insight, the shamans seek to provide the best lives for their people within Azeroth, forming a network between several disparate races. The races of the Horde have always had strong beliefs and a willingness to defend them. In addition, most have clan or tribal political structure, with loyalty to their tribe being strongly valued. The shaman help to meld these tribal forces together, so that all the various tribes and peoples can accomplish a unified goal that benefits all of them. It was the shaman of the orcs that led them into Kalimdor, where they formed bonds with the tauren and trolls that lived there. Only the undead have no shaman, and even within the Horde, this is viewed as disquieting. The Tauren, orcs, and trolls have a common set of beliefs with the goals of while the goals of the undead remain mysterious. So, okay. Now we get into chapter 3 here, and I'll go ahead and start it. So this seems to be like an actual, because this is a strategy guide. So this is going to break down what are the key areas, and again, we don't need to necessarily go through all these bullet points, but I think this is another thing that would be really helpful as a young person playing this game, especially if Wowpedia was still in its infancy. If you didn't have someone helping you along, this actually would be super useful. So it kind of tells you what they are. There's Nomergon, Frostmane Hold. That's like in the beginning. Actually, no, it's not. That's just an area where there are trolls. Southwest Dun Morog. Okay. Chillbreeze Valley is what that's called. There's some quests there. The Grizzled Den. That's another little cave with Yeti. Karanos is the town. Steel Grill's Depot is also like kind of a spin-off. Cold Ridge Pass. This is how you get into Cold Ridge Valley. Cold Ridge Valley is the starting zone. Anvilmar is the little starting city. Iceflow Lake right here. I think that's where you can learn some fishing in the beginning. Shimmer Ridge near it. Eastern Dun Morog. Now, let's see, that's 13. So now we start to get over there. The Misty Pine Refuge. Ambersill Ranch. Gold Bolar Quarry and Mine. That's got some things in there with the far eastern Dun Morog coming over to the side. Helm's Bed Lake. There's some elemental quests there. Northgate Pass. The Northgate Outpost. The Southgate Pass and the Southgate Outpost. With Ironforge itself, the Dwarven capital. They kind of bring you through some quests. So this actually gives you, starting at Anvilmar, a rundown of some of the quests that you could do. Look at that. With these highlighted things. Then you enter Karanos. They tell you, like, they're giving you an idea of quests, important recipes to pick up, rewards. Then they give you a sidebar about Wendigos. Wendigos have it all. They can be skinned for their leather. In addition, they frequently drop coin and cloth. Add to that the supply of the copper in their dungeon, and you have an area that's perfect for crafters, even in groups. Low-level sorts are interested in raising their new trades after often find that the Wendigos offer much while demanding little. So that's neat. So it just gives you that like little tip. I think this is really cool too. So if you are actually interested in going and playing Classic with a true, like as close as you could get hand-holding thing through each guide, this might be a cool exploration for you. Decisions. So it basically gives you, like, though you have quests to turn in back at Karanos, it saves major travel time to get this quest done before leaving the area. This time, you won't be coming back east, so the trip would be wasted if you return now. That said, the perfect stout is very hard to solo, and having a partner or an extra level could make the difference. So decide whether to do the perfect stout now. I think that's where you get the little things by the trolls. It is hard to solo at the beginning. Or after a short run for drop-offs and training. Yeah, that could be. It just depends on how OP you feel. That's cool. So this is pretty neat. It's tempting to even look back and be like, you could almost use this as a way to play through the game. That could be like another video series that someone did. I don't know that I would do this way. But someone out there that wanted to make their own kind of episodic series, you could actually follow through, read this strategy guide, and follow it step by step and just see kind of how it went through each zone. They give you some points of interest in Ironforge. So it even kind of gives you a way to visit Ironforge. The Crafter's Dream, so they talk more about the Wendigo Cave. The Quarry's even better. There's lots of copper. There's ore veins outside. There are trogs. They drop linen money. There's herbs because there's lots of earth root. Yeah, so they're just giving you little hints. Okay, they do the same, and then you get, I'm assuming we're going to go through, let's see how many zones it goes through. So they do the same kind of treatment of Elwyn Forest, which that's pretty neat. I'm giving you a hint about Hearthstones here, teaching kind of how to use them, and how to fight Goldtooth. It's basically saying you should make sure, if you're fighting Goldtooth, it's good to be able to disrupt with stuns. Equipment improvements. For those silver pieces are hard fought, but 5 to 10 silver won't mean much in the long run. Getting a better weapon or armor at a critical moment. So they're basically advocating for buying gear from shop masters, and I don't know. I've never. Yeah, I guess that's true. 5 or 10 silver in the long run won't mean anything. That's like less than you might spend repairing. So cleaning up scraps, they're going to give you the Hogger. This is where they give you your first hint. There's some helpful guards in Stormwind. This gnoll has about 3 times as many hit points as a normal gnoll. A level 10 character can often beat a level 11 without problems, but Hogger lasts much longer, does fair damage, and can defeat solo players with fair regularity. Be sure to wait until Hogger's alone before pulling him. It's always easier that way. Use long-term abilities during the fight to ensure that Hogger stays as debuffed as possible, and buff yourself before going in, which makes you, unless you formed a party, then just knock him out. Yeah, so he could be tough. Okay, and then again, they give the same treatment with Teldrassil. Night Elves have metal, not metal. So yeah, you're going to have a really hard time if you choose any kind of mining job if you're a Night Elf. They also talk about you getting poisoned a lot by spiders and filling up files. They're just kind of giving you the idea of how to do that sort of thing. You have to go into your bag and stuff. And also jump off the branches. And it's saying either go from branch to branch. You could also find water, you know. Dolinar, that's sort of your main hub when you're in the beginning. Avengers are evil. Avengers are a troublesome class of enemies. I think you fight some Furbolg Avengers, maybe some Harpy Avengers. The Furbolgs are one of the races that have Avengers, and there are a number of them out in the Forest of Teldrassil. So when you slay another Furbolg near an Avenger, the Avenger bursts into a rage and starts to attack very quickly with devastating revolt. So try to slay Avengers first. I didn't know that. I mean, I guess it makes sense if you paid attention, but I didn't realize like Avenger was like a mob class. So that's cool. Oh, I didn't even look at this. By the way, our picture for this one is just the generic spellbook. I think, I feel like mages have an icon like this, but it might just be the icon for the spellbook. All right, Duratar quest breakdown. You get some class quests. That's true. They talk about those like scrolls you get in the very beginning. Voodoo and Hex Trolls. That's on that little island that we fought. They can put a dot on there. They're saying don't forget to train every 2 levels. Don't forget to breathe when you go underwater. Okay, Mulgore quest. Mulgore, that zone. Collecting the animal parts, because yes, this is a good zone for that. The Forge. If you go into Beldoon. Yeah, it says you have to use the Forge in the dig site, but actually, yeah, it is hard because they respawn so much. It says it's unnecessary. You don't have to. You could just go back and use it wherever. Wind Fury Witches. Yeah, Casters of Lightning. Watch your step so you don't fall off the lifts when you're going to Thunder Bluff. Kolkar Raiders. They wander in pairs. So they're basically saying just be careful. You probably don't need to fight them. Tristful Glades. You give your first aid. There's a Warlock Demon quest, so they don't do that for everybody, but obviously like this is not the only place where you can get a Warlock Demon quest, but it's there. Look, there's not as many tips because they've kind of gone through a lot of them. Now joining the troops, so this would be moving us on to another chapter. Maybe it says looking for good grinding, questing, so on and so forth. I think this is probably good. We've went through a couple chapters now. I think this is probably a decent stop point for us tonight. But as you can see, you'll kind of see the flow of these episodes. This is not like our typical reading. This is just a review. So my apologies if it's not as entertaining for you. Again, I'm just going on this journey with you. Just some of this is for nostalgia. Some of this is in case we catch anything interesting that catches our eye. But yeah, with this book and the next book being very long, over 400 pages, I just don't think it's going to be worthwhile to read such dry, and most of it's just talking about playing the game, which is not exactly what this show's all about. It's more focused on lore, and a lot of this stuff isn't necessarily lore. It's describing what you're seeing in the game. So it kind of walks that fine line. Should we consider that lore? I'm willing to take, suggestions if you want this to clip along even faster. if your suggestion is just skip it altogether, I'm not going to do that because I'm that completionist. But you could skip the episodes if you're not into it. No hard feelings. As a matter of fact, only good feelings. Thank you. I'm so appreciative of you guys for watching and for joining. Sorry I didn't have an episode last night. This has just been a bad week. I was doing so good on making lots of episodes, and then yesterday I ended up having to work like a 13-hour day, and then my football team was playing Thursday night football. So by the time I got off work, it was already time for Thursday night football. And so, boom, there goes the whole day. Work, Thursday night football, bed, wake up, rinse, repeat. But I'm here for you guys now, and I will be cranking out an episode each over the weekend here. So you get a couple more episodes this weekend. This one, in the pipe 5x5. Thank you guys so much for watching and for tuning in, and I'll see you next time on Lore of Warcraft.